Shabbat Shalom. All right, so let's make sure we've got the story in mind, because many people, as fascinating as the story of Bilam is, miss some of the key elements that actually make it important. If you've studied with me in the Wednesday class on Torah, you'll know that one of the things I try to drive home again and again is that word choice matters. Right? God is capable of writing anything. It's not like God has a limited vocabulary or limited form of expression. And thus, whichever forms we have of a particular story or passage in the Torah matter. They should not be glanced through and just, oh yes, they're talking about a donkey. We should recognize that there are specific words that are being used, specific structure to the story being created, and that structure, those words, are important. And let's start off with the basic one, which is that Bilam is going on a journey. And on this journey, he is riding a... No. He is riding a jenny. He is riding a aton. He is not riding a chamor. He is riding a aton. Now, if you were reading this in the Hebrew, that would leap out the page and smack you in the face. Because more often than not, when we see a donkey in the Torah, it is a chamor. That is the most common term for a donkey, but that is the male term for a donkey. In English, we call that a jack. It's Jack and Jenny, in case you were wondering what donkey nomenclature handles the male and female. And this is not a jack. This is a jenny. Now again, what did I just say about God's vocabulary? It is infinite. If God chose to tell us this story with a girl donkey, we should pay attention. That there was probably a reason for that. We'll have to come back to that reason, but let's see what actually happens. And I'll refer to the donkey as the jenny just to keep getting that point through as we go. So let's do a quick recap of the story. Bilam sets off on his journey, on his jenny. And on this journey, the jenny notices that there is an angel standing in the middle of the road. What does Jenny do? Not yet. First, she goes off the road. Now, why is she going off the road rather than stopping? Because the way was blocked, but she is still trying to go in the direction that Bilam has asked her to go. So she is not just refusing at stage one. She is still eyes on the prize, trying to get there, but with an angel in the middle, she's going to take a roundabout way. And Bilam's response to her action is he whacks her. He beats her. All right, we don't get the stick yet. Hold on. Remember, word choices matter. He strikes the donkey. And then we move on to incident number 2. Incident number 2, again, Jenny's going along, sees an angel. This time we're not in the middle of an open field and road. Instead, we are sort of squished in the produce and the wall. And what does Jenny do? If anybody's ever ridden a horse or a donkey, you've probably had this experience. She moves up against the wall, crushing his leg against the wall. Happened so many times in my life. And still tries to go forward. Still is moving in the direction that he has asked. And Bilam's response is to hit her again. And then finally, we get to episode number 3. Always remember rule number 3. And now the donkey recognizes that the angel is standing in such a way that there's no room to go left, there's no room to go right, there was nothing to do. And so now what does Jenny do? Thump. Just sits down straight underneath him. And at this point, Bilam hits her with the stick and says, boy, I wish I had a sword, in his retort to her discussion. All right, so let's make sure we got the basic analysis of what she is doing. Is she being disobedient to him? No. As a matter of fact, she is trying to save his life. This is made explicit by what the angel tells Bilam in just the next section. That had she not deviated from the path, you'd be dead now, and she'd be fine. I wasn't going to kill you both, says the angel. I was only going to kill you, and then she'd be able to go live her best donkey life. But instead, she saved your life 3 times. And how did you repay that? But why? Why did he hit her? Ignorant. We're going to have to come back to that. Is it just ignorance? Is it just frustration? Exactly. Of course, as we all know, whenever we're feeling ignorant or frustrated, we look for someone to hit. We're going to have to come back to that fundamental character flaw. But first, I want to make sure that we don't bypass what is a very important detail to this whole story, which is, I've made a big deal of this already, is the fact that this is an aton and not a chamor, that this is a female donkey and not a male donkey. Like I said, the Torah doesn't deal in accidents, and it was not accidental that Bilam happened to be riding a female donkey for this particular scenario to take place. Could it have been done with a chamor? Yes, of course. Would it have taught the same lesson, and the same lesson as powerfully? No, it would not. All right, so let's look at some of the reasons why the aton matters in and of itself, why a female donkey was important. Reason number 1, simple. Macho, machismo, right? Bilam, the great, the mighty, the stupendous diviner of God's will, has to ride a girl donkey because he's not man enough to handle a stallion. Now, I don't mean stallion horses, but a stallion donkey as well is, well, harder to handle. They are very territorial. If you don't know, donkeys in many parts of the world are used as guard animals because they will kill a fox or a coyote or other animals that get in among the livestock very fast. They've got strong teeth and good legs. But those are mostly the boy donkeys. The females are also good on the kicking, not so much the biting, and they're not as territorial. So generally speaking, the chamor, the male donkey, is considered a more aggressive, difficult to control kind of beast, which is why in most modern usages, people have geldings, because it's just easier to handle. So having him on an aton could already be trying to show us that Bilam is not everything that everybody makes him out to be, that he's not the big, powerful, hired guns. You can take this as being a modern Western view. If you were to have the big bad guy coming into the showdown in the town, tumbleweeds going across, and the good guy in the white hat is riding a white horse, and the bad guy is riding a donkey, all of us would immediately think the bad guy is not really much of a threat. Right? Even in the modern world, the guy riding the donkey would be a downgrade from riding a horse, and in the biblical world, there's reason to believe that riding the aton, the female donkey, was a downgrade in his status from riding the chamor. Possibly. This is one explanation for why the aton was also important. The second explanation is, well, sexism. That is to say, the donkey is used as the foil in this story as an example of a creature that could see God's will when Bilam could not. And that Bilam, the high and mighty, could not understand what the angel wanted because he was oblivious to it, but the animal could. Well, how can you drive that message home even harder? It wasn't just an animal that saw what Bilam couldn't. It was a female animal that saw what Bilam couldn't. There is a strain of male versus female ideology, especially in the ancient world. And we know that the Torah was given to people who had that ancient culture, whether it was desired or not. And so Bilam may be torn down even more by the fact that it is his girl donkey that is able to spot the angel and he cannot, perhaps. But it could also be that this is also trying to show us a relationship about power. That by having it be a girl donkey, we are actually creating a message of what the power dynamic was in this situation. And see then how Bilam responds in that power dynamic when he is frustrated, when he is ignorant of that which the other person is. And this brings us back to our character flaw. By having it be a female donkey, we actually have created the most powerless animal. Had it been a chamor, had it been a male donkey, well, were we all biblical farmers, we'd all understand that sometimes those male donkeys can be a little obnoxious, and you got to smack them around a little. That was just normal in the ancient world for a male donkey. But an aton, generally speaking, unless it's, when they're in heat, generally speaking, they're very tractable, and as long as you haven't been abusing them, they're going to be quite agreeable. So the reason for him hitting it is more jarring, whereas the Hamor would not have made somebody who lived in the biblical times as surprised by the abuse. But him hitting this female donkey, we are programmed to feel more compassion, more sympathy for the donkey than we would had it been a Hamor. Everybody following that logic? I know we're not all farmers or engaged in 4-H and such, but trust me that this is one of the emotions of the biblical agricultural society in which the Torah was being done. You're all with me, I hope. I didn't lose you? We're still good? Okay. So, what do we then learn about the character flaw of Bilam that is being held up as a cautionary tale for the rest of us? Because that's really what this story is. Right? The story is not just there was a guy with a donkey and the donkey talked to him. This is a story about what we should do for ourselves. So, lesson number 1 about his character flaw: he is frustrated, he is ignorant, and yet he is the one in power. And when you are the one in power, and somebody who is under your power, who is subservient to you, is doing something you don't like, don't hit them. Listen to them. There's probably a reason why they are doing something that you don't like. You have your hired farmhands, you have the worker in your shop, and they're not doing what you want. Don't just grab your stick and begin hitting them. Instead, find out what's going on. Recognize that because you are in the position of power, you actually have a higher obligation to be patient, to be understanding, and to find out the underlying reason for what's going on. It could be, like the Jenny, they're saving your life multiple times. And you're too ignorant to recognize that. But if you talk to them, maybe you might find that out. Now, it's not only in a power dynamic of employer-employee, but this was almost certainly meant as a cautionary tale for spouses as well. Especially in the biblical time and antiquity, the male head of the household did have inordinate power over the women within the household. As such, it would be tempting to treat them like an aton, like a beast of burden, there to do the bidding of the male leader, and to provide the labor, to provide the services that were expected. And when it wasn't forthcoming, smacking them isn't the answer. Smacking them is not the answer. Spousal abuse continues to be a huge problem, and this little story is probably trying to tell us that it's not a great idea. Judaism frowns very, very strongly against the mistreatment of a spouse by another spouse, and this story exemplifies that. But it also has another reflection of the character flaw of Bilam that we, the Jews, are meant to learn from in order not to imitate, and which we will be tempted to do. And that is the question of who is actually in charge in this situation. Right? Bilam or the Denny? Who's actually doing the work here? The Jenny, the donkey. He's not walking. He's not using his own legs. He's just sitting on top of the donkey, and she's the one carrying him all the way forward. Well, that is very reminiscent of the misunderstanding that happens when they go to Bilam in order to hire him to curse the Israelites. When Bilam blesses those that he blesses and curses those he curses, who actually does the work? I'm sorry, what? God. Right, they're trying to bribe Bilam. They're trying to cajole Bilam to do it, and he is kind of half-heartedly saying, hey, I don't really do this, God does it. But that's not stopping him from trying to beat God into submission to go and do what he wants to do. Because he wants the house full of gold and silver. He wants the honor that will come if he succeeds in cursing Israel. And he's willing to risk it, willing to risk God's anger in order to try and gain that. But what is he doing? He is treating God like a donkey. He is treating God like the servant. Like he is the one in charge, he is the one with the whip, and he will steer God where God should go for his own benefit. And God, like the patient aton, keeps trying to steer him away, keeps trying to say, Bilam, no, I have blessed the people of Israel. You can't really curse them. And Bilam goes, sorry, guys, I don't think I can do it. And doesn't tell them why. Doesn't explain to Balak through the emissaries why he won't be able to curse the people of Israel. Why? Because he's hoping that maybe he can change God's mind. And then they come back, and he's like, but I told you before, but tell you what, I'll dream on it. I'm sorry, you think God changed his mind? You think that if you go have a nice, good dream and vision, maybe you can smack God, and God is going to turn a different direction, and now you will be able to get those shiny, shiny coins? But that's what Bilam is doing. He is trying to treat God like the Jenny, like the Aton. He thinks that he's in charge just because he's the one that is in status, even though it is God doing all of the work. And it turns out that is a really, really bad idea. It turns out that if you are using the power of someone else, mistreating them is really going to come back and bite you eventually. You might be able to rely on their patience for a while. You might be able to rely on their kindness for a while, as Bilam does in the story of the donkey. But ultimately, they are going to refuse. They are going to stop. Or, at worst, they are going to let you die. If the donkey had not liked Bilam as much as it did, Bilam would have been dead. And ultimately, what happens to Bilam? Well, according to the continuation of the story into next week's parashah and the reflections upon him within the books of the prophets and the midrashim, he fails at cursing us, famously, which is where we get the matovu coming from, as he ends up blessing us. And so instead, he comes up with alternative ways to exploit our own vulnerabilities and our own temptations. And eventually, for that crime, God is finally able to punish him terminally. And Bilam is killed for his crime. Ultimately, if we think we are the ones in charge of God and that we can bend God to our will, all we have to do is say the right prayer, do the right mitzvah, and then I am sort of whipping God down the track like a donkey heading where I need God to go. We have misunderstood the fundamental relationship between us and God. God is there to guide us, to steer us, to give us these opportunities to live a good life and to do the right thing. But God is not above, allowing us to have the free will that is our human heritage. And if we choose to use that free will to do something horrible and evil, and God has tried to warn us against it enough times, eventually God is going to say, all right, go ahead. I can't stop you from exercising your human legacy, but I can hold you accountable within divine justice. And ultimately, that is the fate of Bilam, is he misunderstood that relationship between himself and God. He misunderstood the relationship of power between himself and the Aton. And ultimately, the message was not for his benefit, but for ours. Because we are the ones who still retell the story of Bilam. There are no Moabites or Midianites that are still telling the story. And we are not telling it as a shame on you for those of those nations. We are telling it as a reminder to ourselves of how will we relate to those within our power structures? How will we relate to those that are not? How will we relate to God? How will we be able to find a way to recognize that we are not in a relationship to cajole or beat what we want out of God, but we are in a relationship to grow in the way that God has shown us how to grow. That has been the struggle for 3,000 years. Let's make sure that we are the good donkey, not the stubborn one. Shabbat Shalom.